1 in 6 people today is emotionally entangled with a narcissist. That's not a dramatic guess. That's based on clinical estimates of narcissistic traits affecting over 16% of the population, according to studies published in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry. And if you're watching this, chances are you're one of them. It doesn't always start with pain. In fact, most narcissists don't come into your life looking like villains. They show up as everything you ever wanted: attentive, magnetic, intense, until suddenly the attention becomes control, the charm becomes manipulation, and the person you thought you loved becomes the one you're afraid of. What makes narcissistic abuse so dangerous is that it's invisible at first, but leaves scars that run deeper than physical wounds. In one study, over 90% of survivors reported symptoms identical to PTSD, insomnia, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, and a total loss of self. You lose your voice. You lose your confidence. You start questioning reality itself. But today, we take it all back. Because once you understand the game, the tactics, the mask, the hidden psychology, you stop being a victim of their illusion, and you start becoming untouchable. If you are, or ever were, in this kind of situation, leave a like and subscribe. You can share your experience below, or simply write thank you in the comments to let others know they're not alone. Now let's expose the mask and start your transformation. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And when it comes to narcissists, this runs deeper than you imagine. Their entire identity is a carefully constructed mask, polished, rehearsed, and projected with surgical precision. But the moment you start to question it, the mask cracks, and what lies beneath is not power, it's emptiness. According to the National Institutes of Health, approximately 6.2% of the population meets the clinical criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. That's over 20 million people in the US alone. And that doesn't count the millions more living in the gray zone of subclinical narcissism. The charming boss who humiliates you in private, the partner who gaslights you with a smile, the friend who competes with your pain. You've met them, you've felt them, maybe you've even loved them. But here's the trap. Narcissists don't show up as monsters. They show up as exactly what you needed. They read you like a book. They mirror your dreams, your wounds, your desires. They listen intensely. And you mistake that for intimacy. What they're actually doing is data collection. Every secret you share becomes ammunition. Every vulnerability. Narcissists build their power on your openness. Dr. Ramani Devasula calls it manufactured intimacy. And she's right, because what you think is connection is really control. A slow, calculated invasion of your psyche. You start to doubt your instincts. You second-guess your memory. You apologize for things you didn't do. Not because you're weak, but because you've been psychologically programmed to believe that their version of reality is more valid than yours. This isn't just manipulation. It's a full psychological operation. Neuroscience confirms this. Studies published in the Journal of Personality Disorders showed that narcissists exhibit lower gray matter volume in brain regions related to empathy, emotional regulation, and moral reasoning, specifically the anterior insular and medial prefrontal cortex, which means they literally don't feel guilt or emotional resonance the way you do. You're not crazy for feeling like something's off. You're nervous. Cystia is simply picking up what your conscious mind hasn't accepted yet. And it gets worse. Narcissists construct a false self, a grandiose persona built to protect the fragile, terrified identity buried beneath. Sigmund Freud called this the ego ideal, the unreachable fantasy self that must be maintained at all costs. That's why they react with such aggression to criticism. That's why they can't admit fault. To protect the fantasy, they must destroy anything that threatens it. Even you. Maybe you've noticed it, the way every conversation becomes a trap, how every confrontation flips into your fault, how they make you feel small, confused, exhausted. This is not an accident. It's the result of gaslighting, a method of psychological abuse where the victim is made to question their own reality. The term comes from the 1944 film Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife into believing she's going insane. Narcissists do the same, only they smile while doing it. But here's the shift. Once you name it, you weaken it. Stoic philosopher Epictetus realized that your mind is complicit in the provocation. This isn't blame, it's power. Because once you see the pattern, you begin to step out of it. You stop feeding the mask with your validation. You stop trying to fix what was designed to break you. You stop playing the role they assigned you, and they feel it. Victims of narcissistic abuse often report that their healing began not with confrontation, but with awareness. That moment when everything clicks, when the praise, the punishment, the confusion, the chaos, all suddenly make sense. When you stop asking, why are they doing this, and start asking, why am I staying? You've been dancing with a projection, a fantasy, a mask, and behind it is someone who never truly saw you because they were too terrified to see themselves. But now, the mask is slipping. You see through it, and that changes everything. Because the moment you stop trying to fix the narcissist and start understanding what you're really dealing with is the moment you reclaim your mind. Next, we go deeper into why silence, not confrontation, is what really breaks them. Before continuing, take a moment to leave a like and subscribe. We'll continue now. There's a reason Marcus Aurelius warned us not to waste time arguing what a good man should be, just be one. And when you're dealing with a narcissist, no piece of wisdom rings louder. You've tried to explain. You've raised your voice. Maybe you've even cried, hoping anything would break through, but nothing worked. Because with a narcissist, insults don't penetrate. Arguments don't shake them. In fact, those things feed them. What does destroy them? Silence, indifference, the complete absence of emotional fuel. Neuroscience explains why. According to research published in Psychiatry Research, narcissists show heightened activity in the brain's reward center when receiving praise, but also when receiving attention, even if it's negative. That's right, your anger fuels them just as much as your admiration. To the narcissist, your rage is a form of attention. Your pain validates their power. So, when you scream, they win. When you cry, they grow stronger. But when you go silent, they crumble. Carl Jung called it psychic starvation. He described how certain personalities, especially those driven by ego, depend entirely on the responses of others to stabilize their false sense of self. And this is precisely the narcissist's Achilles heel. They live in a fragile house of mirrors, one you built, polished, and maintained without even knowing it. The moment you stop feeding that illusion, the walls begin to crack. Studies in behavioral psychology have shown that social rejection activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain. For a narcissist, your silence isn't just it's excruciating. It destabilizes their identity. Think about that. You don't have to lift a finger to inflict this kind of damage. You just have to disengage. But there's a catch. The narcissist knows this too. That's why, the moment you begin to withdraw, they'll suddenly become sweet, apologetic, curious. They'll promise change. They'll love bomb you, because their worst fear is not your hatred, it's your emptiness. It's being ignored, forgotten, not mattering. This is why silence is not weakness, it's strategy, a psychological defense mechanism that has been used for centuries, even by Stoic philosophers. Seneca famously said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." In the case of narcissistic abuse, sometimes even to say nothing is an act of power. You might be thinking, but they'll think I don't care. That's exactly the point. You're reversing the polarity. Narcissists thrive when you are the one chasing, reacting, proving. But when you become the mystery, when you stop explaining, stop justifying, stop caring, they're the ones left with the noise, and they hate it. Even the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit notes that emotional predators often escalate when denied emotional feedback. That's why ignoring them isn't just a tactic. It's a commitment, one that requires strength, preparation, and clarity. This is not passive aggression. This is intentional disengagement, the most effective antidote to manipulation. Freud believed that narcissists are stuck in a developmental stage of emotional immaturity, desperately needing validation, but incapable of empathy. So, when you remove their mirror, their sense of control collapses. Your silence confronts them with something they cannot manipulate, the reality. And if you think they don't notice, think again. Many survivors report narcissists calling them out weeks, months, even years after being ignored. It haunts them, because in your absence, they finally face what they've been running from, their own emptiness. But let's be clear. Ignoring isn't about playing games. It's not about pretending not to care while secretly obsessing. True Stoic indifference is a shift in values. You no longer measure your worth through their reactions. You stop performing for their approval. You stop reacting to their chaos. You reclaim your peace. This is where transformation begins. Not in a dramatic confrontation, not in a final speech, but in the quiet, powerful decision to no longer be a participant in their play. You walk off their stage, and they're left alone with an audience of one, themselves. Next, we go even deeper into the very thing that makes the narcissist panic the most. You taken back control. Seneca once wrote, "A man is as miserable as he thinks he is." But what he didn't say, what modern psychology now proves, is that when a narcissist believes they're losing control, their misery turns into rage, obsession, and collapse. This part isn't just about hurting the narcissist. It's about understanding why your freedom is their suffering, and how taking back control flips the entire dynamic. Let's begin with something most people don't realize. Narcissists aren't drawn to strong people because they admire them. They're drawn to them because they want to own them, to dominate them, to turn their light inward and feed off it. That's why they target your ambition, your relationships, your confidence. They isolate you subtly, chip away at your independence, and replace your reality with theirs. This is not a theory. Dr. Eleanor Greenberg, a clinical psychologist specializing in narcissistic abuse, calls it identity erosion. Over time, victims begin to lose their own values and desires, replacing them with what the narcissist permits. But something happens when you start taking back the steering wheel, when you stop asking for permission to think, feel, decide. That shift, subtle at first, triggers a narcissistic injury. According to the DSM-5 in numerous clinical studies, narcissists experience the specific type of psychological wound when their false self is threatened. They feel humiliated, exposed, but instead of self-reflection, they retaliate. Why? Because control is not a preference for them. It's survival. Brain scans reveal narcissists have increased activation in the prefrontal cortex when faced with social rejection or unpredictability. It means that when you no longer behave as expected, when you reclaim your time, your voice, your space, it literally triggers a stress response in their brain. They feel it as danger, as loss of identity. Jung would call this a disintegration of the persona. You were a part of their costume, their character. Now, by pulling away, you've exposed the actor beneath the mask. That's why even small actions, taking a day without replying, refusing to explain your choices, or pursuing your goals without involving them, feel like violence to them. You're no longer acting in their script, you're writing your own. Taking back control doesn't require a battle. It begins quietly. You stop explaining yourself. You make decisions without their input. You set boundaries and keep them, not as punishment, but as self-respect. And suddenly, the narcissist doesn't recognize you anymore. You've become someone they can't predict, can't manipulate, can't dominate. That unpredictability is psychological torture for them. Freud observed that narcissists are trapped in what he called the ego ideal, a mental image of themselves that must be constantly validated by others. The moment you stop feeding that ideal, their inner world fractures. They lash out, they play victim, they try to shame you into submission. But it's not because they love you or miss you. It's because they can feel the loss of power. And power, to them, is love. What makes this so dangerous is that narcissists stand just mourn the relationship. They mourn the loss of control over you. That's why they keep coming back long after the breakup. Why they hoover with kind messages or explosive outbursts. It's not you they miss. It's the power they had over you. And the more you evolve, the more painful it becomes for them. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're proving something terrifying. They never owned you. There's a hidden beauty in this shift. When you take back control, you're not just tormenting the narcissist. You're healing yourself. You begin to rewire your nervous system, shift out of survival mode, and return to clarity. According to trauma specialists like Dr. Bessel van der, recovering from narcissistic abuse requires re-establishing a sense of agency. The brain must feel that it has choice again, that it's no longer stuck. And every time you make a decision for yourself, no matter how small, you reinforce that healing. Every act of independence reminds your nervous system, I'm safe now. That safety is everything the narcissist fears, because it means you're out of their reach. This part isn't about revenge, it's about disconnection. The moment you stop orbiting around them, the illusion collapses. You become untouchable, not because you fought back, but because you stopped playing the game. Up next, we'll dismantle the game entirely by doing what they hate most, breaking the patterns, and with it, their control over your mind. Before continuing, take a moment to leave a like and subscribe. We'll continue now. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When it comes to narcissists, that unconscious drive is one thing: control through predictability. They don't need to read your mind, they just need you to repeat yourself, to respond the same way, to keep reacting from fear, guilt, or habit. Because if they can predict you, they can program you. But the moment you break that pattern, you become a threat. Not because you've become aggressive, but because you've become uncontrollable. Here's what most people don't know. Narcissists thrive on behavioral conditioning. Like skilled manipulators, they push your buttons, observe your reaction, and adjust their tactics. Over time, they train you. You apologize even when you didn't do anything. You anticipate their moods. You edit yourself. This isn't imagination. It's classic trauma bonding, backed by neurobiology. According to Dr. Patrick Carnes, a pioneer in the study of trauma bonds, the brain under narcissistic abuse releases a mix of cortisol and dopamine, creating a cycle of fear and reward almost identical to addiction. That's why leaving feels like withdrawal. That's why breaking the cycle feels like breaking a spell. But unpredictability shatters the spell. A 2020 study published in Frontiers in Psychology shows that narcissistic exhibits significant emotional dysregulation when confronted with unpredictable social responses. Simply put, when you no longer react how they expect, when you change the rhythm, they lose their psychological grip. They can't adapt, because all their control depends on your script being predictable. This is where your power returns. Let's say you used to defend yourself every time they accused you. Try silence instead. Let the accusation hang in the air, unanswered. You used to justify why you needed space. Now you take it without explanation. You used to argue late at night because they pushed you when you were tired. Now you say, "We'll talk tomorrow," and walk away. These small, subtle acts don't just confuse the narcissist. They destabilize the entire system they built around controlling you. Freud once described narcissists as trapped in a state of emotional infancy, unable to regulate their ego without external validation. So when you begin to act out of autonomy instead of reactivity, you remove the emotional cues they need to feel in charge. And without those cues, they unravel fast. But unpredictability isn't about chaos. It's about intentional deviation, strategic withdrawal. It's about showing that you're no longer playing the role they wrote for you. Because here's the truth. The narcissist doesn't love you. They love the role you played. The version of you that was compliant, emotional, dependent. You becoming something else. Something free is their worst nightmare. Jung called this the process of separating from the collective mask to become your authentic self. And ironically, it's this very growth that causes narcissists to spiral. Because they haven't grown. They can't. Their identity depends on sameness, on loops, on certainty. And you've become unpredictable. You've become a variable. You've become the one thing their ego cannot digest. Someone who doesn't need them. Even in clinical practice, therapists use unpredictability with narcissistic patients, not out of cruelty, but to challenge their rigid perception of power. The goal is to force internal reflection. Some evolve, most react, but in both cases, the illusion of dominance breaks. This might explain why so many narcissists escalate when you shift, why they lash out harder, cry louder, or suddenly become the victim. That's not transformation. That's panic. Because if they can't anticipate you, they can't own you. And if they can't own you, they are left with what they fear most, themselves. So be unpredictable. Not to confuse, but to disengage, to interrupt the pattern, to teach your brain something radical. You are no longer a participant in this system. You are not the prey. You are the pattern breaker. And your unpredictability is not cruelty. It is healing. Up next, we'll explore something even more devastating to their identity than unpredictability, mirroring their truth back to them without saying a single word. Sigmund Freud once said that narcissists see others not as people, but as extensions of themselves. Carl Jung expanded on this, warning that those who deny their own flaws will inevitably project them onto others. In a relationship with a narcissist, this projection becomes your prison, until one day, something subtle changes. You stop reacting, you become a mirror, and suddenly, they see themselves, not the grand version, but the raw, unfiltered truth, and it terrifies them. Here's what psychology reveals. Narcissists avoid self-awareness like it's poison, because to confront their real self, the emptiness, the insecurity, the fragility, would mean dismantling their entire identity. According to a groundbreaking study published in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, narcissists have a strong unconscious awareness of their flaws, but consciously deny them to maintain their ego. This internal split makes them hypersensitive to anything that reflects their hidden self. Not your insults, not your words, but your energy, your silence, your detachment, your refusal to play their game. This is the power of mirroring, not mimicking, but reflecting. When you stop reacting emotionally, you deny them what they need most, distract, and suddenly, they're forced to face their own behaviors, echoed back in your calm presence. That's not passivity, that's psychological precision. Dr. Ramani Devasula often speaks about how narcissists are wired to provoke emotions to avoid accountability. They bait you into defending yourself, justifying yourself, apologizing for things that were never your fault. But when you don't rise to it, when you remain centered, stoic, calm, it sends a message louder than any scream. I'm not afraid. Even neuroscience supports this. Studies using functional MRI scans show that emotional mirroring activates empathy circuits in healthy individuals, but causes stress and even rage in narcissistic ones. Why? Because when you stop cushioning their reality, they start to feel it raw. And for someone who's built their entire persona on illusion, that's unbearable. Mark wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good." But the narcissist cannot look within, not because they're evil, but because it would collapse their structure. That's why mirroring, done without aggression, without words, is so devastating. It exposes what they're running from without giving them anyone else to blame. You might ask, how do I do this in practice? Start by refusing to perform. If they try to provoke you, observe. Let the silence answer. If they blame you, don't defend. Just pause. If they exaggerate their success or play victim, don't feed it. Just exist in your truth. The discomfort they feel is the echo of their own voice, not yours. This is what therapists call reflective presence. It's used in trauma therapy to help patients see themselves safely. But with narcissists, it backfires, because they're not seeking truth. They're seeking reinforcement. And when they can't find it in you, they spiral. Real-life examples prove this. Survivors of narcissistic abuse often report a turning point, not a fight, not a confrontation, but a shift. I stopped arguing. I started observing. I let them hear their own words in silence. That moment becomes the beginning of collapse. Not yours, theirs. The Greek myth of Narcissus ends with him falling in love with his own reflection. But what most forget is that it wasn't love. It was obsession with an image he couldn't possess. That's the narcissist's tragedy. When you stop reflecting what they want and start reflecting what is, you become untouchable, not by force, but by clarity. And here's the irony. The more you reflect their truth, the more they call you cruel, cold, unfeeling. But that's only because truth, to them, is cruelty. It breaks their fantasy. It ends the illusion. Up next, we'll explore the most elegant form of revenge. Not silence, not reflection, but something even more transformative. Living well, and letting that destroy everything they thought they had over you. Seneca said it with brutal clarity. Living well is the best revenge. But when you've been torn down by a narcissist, those words can feel hollow. At first, because you don't want peace, you want justice. You want them to feel what you felt. You want them to understand the wreckage they left behind. But here's the twist. Narcissists don't break when you attack them. They break when they realize they can't affect you anymore. And nothing communicates that louder than building a life they're no longer a part of, and never will be again. Psychologists have studied this reaction in depth. According to Dr. Craig Malkin, author of Rethinking Narcissism, narcissists suffer most when they realize they've lost their emotional influence, that their target, who has not just moved on, but thrived. This isn't just hurtful to them, it's identity, because in their mind, you were never supposed to rise without them. You were the echo, the shadow, the supporting character. Watching you grow without their approval feels like betrayal, and it shakes the illusion they worked so hard to create. There's real data behind this. A study published in Personality Disorders, Theory, Research, and Treatment found that narcissists experience significantly more rage and emotional dysregulation when confronted with an ex-partner who appears happier or more successful than they are, especially when that ex doesn't acknowledge them at all. It's the ultimate insult. You didn't just survive, you transcended, without explanation, without apology. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But narcissistic abuse tries to rob you of that privilege. It replaces your voice with theirs, your dreams with their agenda. So when you reclaim your path, not out of spite, but because it is yours, it sends a clear message. You never had me. You only thought you did. You don't need to post about it. You don't need to prove it. Your life becomes the proof. Your stillness, your glow, the way your presence shifts from tension to peace. It confuses them, enrages them, because narcissists are wired to measure their worth through dominance, not only in conflict, but in absence. When you're gone, they expect your world to shrink. When it expands instead, they start to panic. This is the essence of Stoic revenge. It's not destruction, it's creation. Marcus Aurelius didn't wage emotional wars. He mastered himself. He led an empire while journaling about humility, discipline, and emotional detachment. Why? Because true power isn't loud, it's still. And narcissists can't interpret stillness. They mistake it for weakness, until it becomes unshakable. Your peace will disturb them more than any insult ever could, because your peace means their grip is gone, that they no longer have access to the part of you they used to control. And as Epictetus taught, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The narcissist now suffers, not from what you're doing, but from what they imagine you no longer need. Real-life survivors often report that the turning point wasn't cutting contact. It wasn't a dramatic goodbye. It was something quieter. They started sleeping better, laughing more, reconnecting with friends, launching projects, returning to hobbies. They didn't rebuild themselves to show the narcissist anything. They rebuilt because they remembered who they were before the manipulation. And here's the painful beauty of it. They often never got closure. They never got the apology. They never got the final word. But they realized they didn't need it. Because living well isn't about making someone else regret losing you. It's about you no longer regretting losing yourself. And that, more than anything else, is what cripples the narcissist's illusion. That they were central to your story. That you were broken without them. That they were the best thing that ever happened to you. Your joy rewrites that story. And they can't stop it. They can't touch it. Because they no longer have the role they thought was permanent. Up next, we go even deeper. We move from healing to transformation, to the most terrifying thing you can become in the eyes of a narcissist unshakable. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And that is exactly what the narcissist fears most. Not your anger, not your words, not even your absence, but your self-mastery, your emotional sovereignty, your ability to walk away and never look back. Because once you become unshakable, they are no longer needed. Worse, they are no longer powerful. And in their world, that is worse than death. Let's ground this in what science tells us. The American Psychological Association defines emotional resilience as the ability to adapt successfully in the face of adversity, trauma, or prolonged stress. But for survivors of narcissistic abuse, resilience becomes more than adaptation, it becomes evil. The brain, once hijacked by trauma bonding and fear-based patterns, begins to rewire. According to studies in Europe, the brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and emotional regulation, literally grows stronger with repeated acts of boundary setting and emotional detachment. That means that every time you say no, every time you walk away from manipulation, every time you center yourself, instead of reacting, you are not just healing, you are becoming neurobiologically immune to the narcissist's control. And they feel it. You've probably noticed it. The shift. At first, they tried love bombing, then they tried guilt, then rage, then silence. And now, nothing works. You don't react. You don't bend. You don't flinch. That's not coldness, it's clarity. That's not apathy, it's inner stability. And for the narcissist, that is the ultimate wound. Someone who has seen through the illusion and didn't collapse. Carl Jung wrote, "The best political, social, and spiritual work we can do is to withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others." That's what you're doing now. You're no longer taking on their shame, their blame, their chaos. You're giving it back, not with violence, with stillness, with maturity, with grounded presence. And for someone who feeds off reactivity, your calm is their starvation. This doesn't mean you become robotic. Stoicism is not emotional suppression. It's emotional discipline. Marcus Aurelius didn't avoid feeling, he avoided being ruled by feeling. He journaled his pain. He acknowledged his suffering. But he returned again and again to the same question. Is this within my control? And if it wasn't, he let it go. That's what you are now. A person who does not hand over their power for temporary value. A person who no longer needs to prove they were right, or get closure, or make the narcissist understand. You understand, and that's enough. And if you still wonder, do they care? The answer is complicated. Narcissists don't care like you do. They crave control. They remember who gave it to them, and who took it back. You will live in their mind not as the one who hurt them, but as the one they couldn't break. The one who didn't need revenge. The one who didn't collapse. The one who disappeared and became untouchable. That's not fantasy. That's transformation. And it's happening. Dr. Judith Herman, one of the foremost researchers on trauma recovery, explains that the final stage of healing is reconnection with self and society. That means your journey doesn't end in silence or solitude. It ends with expansion, new relationships, creative expression, inner peace. You become a living contradiction to the narcissist's narrative. Not because you told your story louder, but because you lived it. You are no longer reactive. You are responsive. No longer on edge, you are centered. You don't fear abandonment because you no longer abandon yourself. And the narcissist, they can't follow you here. They don't know this terrain. They only know chaos, control, and illusion. But you have chosen clarity, calm, and freedom. That is the unshakable you, and it's the one thing they will never understand, and never, ever control.